Today, we will hear from Shahrokh Monjazeb, and this is just a very short form of his biography. There's really quite a lot that can be said. He has been involved in translating the Baha'i writings into English from Arabic and Persian for 2 decades. He particularly focuses on the writings of Baha'u'lláh, and often he's been looking at many of the proclamatory tablets of Baha'u'lláh to kings and rulers. Lately, that's been a real focus from what I've seen anyway. He has been making presentations at the Association for Baha'i Studies on the subject, and he has also published a book in 1991, Baha'u'lláh, A Brief Survey of His Life and Works. He's also been assisting the World Center with some of their authoritative translations as well. At times they've asked him for advice, or he has done translation drafts that they could then use in their own translations. So he has been really quite prolific in not only this translation of the Baha'i writings into English, but also in their deep study. And we will benefit now from his detailed study of the Lawh-i-Sultán, the tablet that Baha'u'lláh revealed to Násiri'd-Dín Shah. So at this point, we will switch our screen over to Shahrokh's screen, and Shahrokh can take it away.
It's so good to be here once again with you guys. For those who are continuing and taking these courses at the Wilmette Institute on Baha'u'llah's Letters to the Kings, this would be the second installment. We had in 2017 a 4-part webinar course on Baha'u'llah's Surat al-Muluk, which was his seminal work to the kings and rulers collectively, as well as the first individual address to Sultan Abdul Aziz, the reigning monarch of the Ottoman Empire. The next series of courses are going to cover more of the individual tablets which Baha'u'lláh wrote and dispatched to individual monarchs, and we're trying to do that somewhat in a chronological basis or from a historical basis. So the Lawh-i-Sultán was Baha'u'llah's next major work, and I will take you through some facets of it today, and in the next 2 webinars that we'll have with the course, we'll cover hopefully the entire text. So we have a lot of material to cover today, and I will get right into it. So today we'll cover, basically we'll talk about we set the stage, the general introduction, and we'll try to cover paragraphs 1 to 20. But the first question, again, I like to, at the onset of every course or every study of every tablet of Baha'u'lláh, perhaps we need to ask ourselves, why is it important to study Baha'u'llah's Lawh-i-Sultán in 2018? The fact that it happens to be the 150th anniversary of it obviously gives us certain incentive, but how is it relevant today? And well, besides being among the major proclamatory works of Baha'u'lláh to the kings and rulers of the 19th century, it is, according to Shoghi Effendi, a document in which the aims, purposes, and principles of his faith are expounded and the validity of his mission demonstrated. It is also, I believe, a great exposition for the Iranian people today to learn about the faith which emerged from their native land and whose teachings are now widely embraced throughout the world. When studying this particular work of Baha'u'lláh, I believe 3 major facets surrounding it needs to be examined. And those are, first, the person of the tablet. There are, we'll see in the tablet, some of them subtle and nuances that really speaks to the personality and the character of this individual, namely Násiri'd-Dín Shah. And we'll learn a little bit more about him. I mean, besides the fact that he was a king, he was a bit of a despot, and not a bit, but he was a despot, and besides other negative qualities, he was not a very nice man, if you will. And so it really allows us, by knowing him, it allows us how Baha'u'lláh is attempting to reach him by showing grace, by expressing in a certain way that hopefully it would meet the immediate needs of the minds of this individual. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen to be the case, but again, the tablet itself sets a moral lesson of exposition and communication as well, I believe. The second facet is the manner in which the tablet was dispatched to this recipient and how it was received. It was very important. It has a historical significance. It is perhaps one of the only tablets that had a very dramatic reception than all the other letters that Baha'u'lláh wrote. So it is definitely worth examining and looking and studying. And of course, all the features of the text of the tablet, the style, the contents, largely as Shoghi Effendi says, Baha'u'lláh in a nutshell covers the aim of his revelation, and some of the fundamental verities of his revelation are clearly enunciated in this tablet, which was among his first proclamatory works, which constituted his public proclamation of his divine mission. Now let's look at the personality and character of Násiri'd-Dín Shah. In his general letter to the Baha'is of the West, written in 1941 and entitled later as The Promised Day Is Come, Shoghi Effendi describes Násiri'd-Dín Shah in these words. He says that he was a selfish, capricious, imperious monarch who succeeded the throne of Iran, and for a half a century was destined to remain the sole arbiter of the fortunes of his hapless country. His father, Muhammad Shah, we were introduced to Muhammad Shah because he was a contemporary Qajar king at the time of the revelation of the Báb, at the time of the declaration of the Báb in 1844. Násiri'd-Dín Shah was born in 1830. His father passed away in 1848, that very significant year where the Sheikh Tabarsi insurrection had taken place and the Báb was being transferred from Mahku to Shahrokh as well. It was also the year of the revelation of the Persian Bayan and the Arabic Bayan as well. So very important, significant year, the year of the revolutions in Europe as well. So Násiri'd-Dín Shah, at the age of 18, succeeds his father and ascends the throne of Iran. So he was a rather inexperienced individual at the time. And he winds up being on the throne for 50 years. So at least 50 lunar years, as it was the custom in Iran to use the calendar, the lunar calendar. So the Guardian continues on and says that in describing him, he says, a disastrous obscurantism, a chaotic administration in the provinces, the disorganization of the finances of the realm, the intrigues, the vindictiveness, and profligacy of the pampered and greedy courtiers who buzzed and swarmed round his throne, his own despotism, which, but for the restraining fear of European public opinion and the desire to be thought well of in the capitals of the West, would have been more cruel and savage, were the distinguishing features of the bloody reign of one who styled himself as footpath of heaven, an asylum of the universe. You know, he was referred to as Qibleh Alam, which was a gross exaggeration of who he really was. But again, an autocrat, an imperious monarch of the worst kind, if you will. The Guardian continues on and says, a triple darkness of chaos, bankruptcy, and oppression enveloped the country. And his own assassination was the first portent of the revolution, which was to restrict the prerogatives of his son and successor, depose the last two monarchs of the House of Qajar, and extinguish their dynasty. On the eve of his jubilee, which was his 50th anniversary of his ascension to the throne of Iran, which was to inaugurate a new era. This was in 1896, and the celebration of which had been elaborately prepared. He fell in the shrine of Shah Abdul-Azim, a victim to assassin's pistol. He was killed by Mirza Rezai Kermani, who was one of the devotees of Sayyid Jamaluddin Asadabadi, the Afghan, who was a nationalist and believed in pan-Islamic concept, and obviously was an anti-royalist and so on. And he was shot straight through the heart, and he was killed instantly in the innermost shrine of Shah Abdul-Azim. His dead body, the Guardian continues, driven back to his capital, propped up in the royal carriage in front of the Grand Vizier in order to defer the news of his murder. His prime minister at the time was Sultán, and what Sultán did in order to not let chaos prevail in the capital, when he ordered that the body of the Shah be put on the carriage, and they propped him up in such a way that as they drove him back to the capital as though he was still alive, but he was dead, and his lifeless body was in the carriage, essentially just showing that he was inside the carriage. So it was a bit of a spectacle, and so on. As far as the the infamy of his reign, it's very interesting that Abdul Baha's Secret of Divine Civilization, which addresses the Iranian people in some ways, and how Iran needs to rise to a new level and be the example amongst nations, was written in 1875 during the reign of Násiri'd-Dín Shah. So this is the darkest period in the 19th century as far as where both the economical, cultural aspect of Iran had fallen to their lowest ebb, if you will. The Guardian continues on in The Promised Days Come. He says that thus fell the one whose reign will remain forever associated with the most heinous crime in history, the martyrdom of the one whom the supreme manifestation of God proclaimed to be the point round whom the realities of the prophets and messengers revolve. As you will recall, for those who have studied the Dawnbreakers or other Baha'i histories, that the martyrdom of the Báb in 1850 was instrumental through Násiri'd-Dín Shah's first prime minister, Mirza Taghi Khan Amir Kabir. And so, in a way, the king had to give his royal assent for this to take place. So even though the main driving force perhaps would have been the prime minister, Mirza Taghi Khan, but certainly the ultimate blame rests with the king, who's the supreme ruler. And it was under his watch that the Báb was martyred. And many of the early Bábís, as you recall from the attempt assassination in 1852 on the life of Násiri'd-Dín Shah by a small band of Bábís, was due to the fact that they felt that it was the king who had put their holy leader, namely the Báb, to death. But in another, the Guardian continues, in a tablet in which the pen of Baha'u'lláh condemns him, we read, "Among the kings of the earth is the king of Persia, who suspended him, who is the temple of the cause, namely the Báb, in the air and put him to death with such cruelty that all created things and the inmates of paradise and the concourse on high wept for him. He slew, moreover, some of our kindred and plundered our property and made our family captives in the hands of the oppressors. This is an actual reference, a historical reference that Baha'u'lláh makes soon after the attempt on the life of the Shah. A Bábí pogrom ensued, and where in excess of, I would say, about 20,000 Bábís were actually massacred. So that during that genocide, Baha'u'llah's ancestral district, his home in his ancestral district in Nur was ransacked. His own house in Tehran was ransacked. So and many of the Nuri families who were particularly had embraced the cause of the new faith fell to the vengeance of the government in order to decimate and obliterate the Bábís as a result of this heinous act of the attempt on the life of the Shah. So this is where Baha'u'lláh refers to that, and some members of Baha'u'llah's family, his kindreds, were actually martyred, and their properties were plundered. And so this is the reference that Baha'u'lláh is making to that. Once again, Baha'u'lláh continues, he imprisoned me. By God, the true one, none can reckon the things which befell me in prison. He's making a reference to the Siyah, save God, the reckoner, the omniscient, the almighty. Subsequently, he banished me and my family from my country, whereupon we arrived in Iraq in evident sorrow. We tarried there until the time when the king of Rome, Sultan of Turkey, arose against us and summoned us unto the seat of his sovereignty. When we reached it, there flowed over us that whereat the king of Persia rejoiced. Later, we entered this prison wherein the hands of our loved ones were torn from the hem of our robe. In such a manner hath he dealt with us. This is a reference to Baha'u'llah's imprisonment in the most great prison in Akka as well. And as you know, for the first few years of Baha'u'llah's imprisonment, there were no pilgrimages, no Baha'is, no followers of Baha'u'lláh were allowed to enter the city. And this is the reference where Baha'u'lláh says, the hands of our loved ones were torn from the hem of our robe. Now, for a great overview of the 50-year reign of Násiri'd-Dín Shah, for the students of the course, I recommend Mr. Bábís's Appendix 1, or Addendum 1, as it's referred to, which is entitled The Disastrous Reign of Násiri'd-Dín Shah. It's truly a wonderful and marvelous historical account of Násiri'd-Dín Shah's disastrous reign for 50 years. And it's published in Mr. Bábís's Baha'u'lláh, the King of Glory. And also for a more scholarly, not that Mr. Bábís wasn't scholarly, it was and it is, but even more detailed account, perhaps the monograph on the life and monarchy of Násiri'd-Dín Shah by Professor Abbas Amanat of Yale University, which is entitled Pivot of the Universe. Very detailed account and very good account of the reign of Násiri'd-Dín Shah and the political scene in Iran and somewhat abroad as well. Now, this leads us to the next facet, which I should be paid attention to when we're studying this tablet, is how the tablet was dispatched and received. We know that from historical evidence that, and I will refer to this later on as well, that this tablet was revealed by Baha'u'lláh in Edirne in early 1868. In fact, there's a reference in the text of the tablet, which we will come across, where Baha'u'lláh is foreshadowing their exile to Akka, which is almost a few months later, but which at that time had not been announced. So it's somewhat mystical that obviously Baha'u'lláh was aware of where they were going, and yet the tablet itself was not dispatched until a year later from Akka in 1869. At the time of the revelation of the Lawh-i-Sultán, Baha'u'lláh had indicated that the delivery of this tablet required a special courier who had not as yet been born. Now, this special courier was to be none other than Agha Buzurg of Nayshabur or Khorasan, the illustrious Badi, who was converted to the faith by Nabil, and he's, as the Guardian says, he was surnamed the Pride of Martyrs, Fakhr al-Shuhada. He was the 17-year-old bearer of the tablet, in whom, as affirmed by Baha'u'lláh, the spirit of might and power was breathed. And he was arrested, branded for 3 successive days, his head beaten to a pulp with the butt of a rifle, after which his body was thrown into a pit and earth and stones heaped upon it. It's a very tragic end to this heroic act by this youth, by this teenager who fell in love with Baha'u'lláh through studying his writings, through Nabil's efforts. And I would highly recommend you study his life, and the account of his life is very soul-stirring and very inspiring, especially for young people. I know myself as a youth, I was quite inspired by reading the account of Badi and his heroic acts and his sacrifice, his ultimate sacrifice with his life. Just to say a few things a little bit about the circumstances of Badi. Badi's father was actually one of the veterans of the Bábí dispensation. In fact, he was his name was Haji Abdul Majid Nayshaburi, and he was one of the companions of Mullah Hussein. The family owned turquoise mines in Nayshabur, but this man had fallen in love with the faith and had dedicated all of his life to the service of the cause. And the reason why he survived the fort of Sheikh Tabarsi insurrection, he was one of the defenders of the fort, was that because of his wealth, he was extorted money. The government officials and the people who essentially overpowered eventually the defenders and lied to them and crucified them. He was one of the few people who survived, and because of his financial situation. And but he later becomes a Baha'i and dedicates his life to the life of service to the cause, and eventually becomes a martyr. He's known in Baha'i history as Abu Badi, which means father of Badi. But his sacrifice and his stature as a martyr is very high. And there's a wonderful story about Abu Badi's attaining the presence of Baha'u'lláh. He wanted to be after the martyrdom of his son, and by this time he was at an advanced age, and he was in the presence of the Blessed Beauty, and he begs Baha'u'lláh that he will grant him martyrdom, and Baha'u'lláh jokes with Haji Abdul Majid and says that, you know, again, I'm paraphrasing from the Pilgrim Notes and the accounts. He says in this way in Persian that روغن ریخته رو نظر امامزاده نمی کنند. So it basically it translates loosely as that spilled oil should not be dedicated to the shrine of the Imam, which was the customer. In a way, Baha'u'lláh is saying that you have given so much, and you have given so much of your sacrifice after all these years, that is, in essence, you're a living martyr. You don't need to lay down your life. But eventually he became a martyr, and so his wish was granted. But he was very, very much loved by Baha'u'lláh, and obviously the sacrifice that his son made to take this momentous letter of Baha'u'lláh to its recipient was truly a heroic act, and a one for the annals of religious history. So the Guardian continues, after visiting Baha'u'lláh in the barracks during the second year of Baha'u'llah's confinement, he, Badi, had risen with amazing alacrity to carry that tablet alone and on foot to Tehran and deliver it into the hands of the sovereign. A 4-month journey had taken him to that city, and after passing 3 days in fasting and vigilance, he had met the Shah proceeding on a hunting expedition to Shemran. And then he had calmly, the Guardian goes on, and respectfully approached His Majesty, calling out, "O King, I have come to thee from Sheba with a weighty message." Whereupon, at the sovereign's order, the tablet was taken from him and delivered to the mujtahids of Tehran, who were commanded to reply to that epistle. A command which they evaded, the Guardian says, recommending instead that the messenger should be put to death. In fact, Násiri'd-Dín Shah himself was very disappointed. It is known that he had made a comment that we respected these clergies and showed them utmost respect all these years, and when the time came for them to do something in the service of the king, they utterly failed. So he was very disappointed that the clergies could not provide an official response to Baha'u'llah's proclamation here. That tablet was subsequently, the Guardian says, forwarded by the Shah to the Persian ambassador in Constantinople, which at the time was Mirza Hossein Khan Moshir-ud-Dawleh, in the hope that its perusal by the Sultan's ministers, the Ottoman Sultan's ministers, which at that time were Ali Pasha and Fuad Pasha, might serve to further inflame the animosity of the Ottomans as well. For a space of 3 years, Baha'u'lláh continued to extol his writings, the heroism in his writings, the heroism of that youth, characterizing the references made by him to that sublime sacrifice as the salt of my tablets, the Guardian writes in God Passes By. So for a more detailed account of Badi and his sacrificial journey to deliver the epistle to the Shah, I recommend reading chapter 33 in Mr. Balyuzi's Baha'u'lláh, the King of Glory, which is called The Story of Badi. It has some very unique and significant historical evidence as well about that, which we may talk about later on, which is actually a first-hand account by a very prominent member of, was a young man at the time, Sabah Salar Tunkabuni, that he writes this account, very interesting account, that when he reads Abdul Baha's unanswered question, and he was on a trip in 1913 to Paris, Madame Laura Clifford Barney, gives him a copy of Abdul Baha's Some Answered Questions, and there is an account, there's this brief reference to Badi by Abdul Baha in Some Answered Questions, and Sebastien Tonkamboni, when he reads that, he actually in the margins of this copy of Some Answered Questions, he writes the detailed account that he heard from the chief executioner who actually was responsible for the slaying of Badi, who heard it firsthand from him when they had met with him. His father and him had met with the Farash Bashi and the chamberlain, if you will, of the king, and the whole account. So he gives a more detailed account from an outside observer about this martyrdom of Badi, which has a significant historical validity and as far as provenance goes and so on. So it's a wonderful account, and Mr. Balyuzi has translated that and has included it in his account of Badi, which I highly recommend the friends who are interested to read. Now let's look at the external features of the tablet. We have some time here. As I mentioned, the tablet was revealed in 1868. It is revealed in Arabic and Persian. It's about 50-50. It is very interesting to note that all Baha'u'llah's proclamatory letters that are addressed to the kings and the rulers are all in the language of eloquence in Arabic. This one, obviously, since the monarch was Persian, even though he understood Arabic as well, because Arabic was the language of the learning, or the language of the learned, if you will, in the 19th century, Baha'u'llah reveals this in both Persian and Arabic. So the percentage is almost 50-50, maybe 55% in Arabic and 45% in Persian. An authorized Baha'i English translation is available and is published in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts, which is about 41.5 pages long. Now, this is included in the Surah Haykal, as you all know, after the revelation of all these letters to the kings. Baha'u'llah ordered that a select group of these tablets be calligraphied and made into a form of a temple and be included in this new form of Surah of the Temple. There was a Surah of the Temple that was revealed previously, so that became the introduction or the introducing tablet, and then tablets to the Pope, to the Tsar of Russia, to Queen Victoria, to Napoleon III. His second tablet to Napoleon III and Lawh-i-Sultán constitute this Surah Haykal and these tablets of Haykal that Baha'u'llah had commissioned to be calligraphied and would be put into the form of this temple, this five-pointed star, if you will. So in the Summons of the Lord of Hosts, it is the last tablet in the Lawh-i-Haykal, if you will, from pages 96 to 137. The Guardian, it's very interesting, the Guardian had only translated about 20% of this this tablet, and most of that is in the Promised Days Come. There's some excerpts of it that Baha'u'llah had quoted in Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, so it's also in the Guardian's translation of Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, but by and large, most of it is published in the Promised Days Come. Now, it is worth mentioning, perhaps, why the Guardian didn't translate all of it or retranslate all of it, is that Abdul Baha had included a significant section, almost half of the tablet, was quoted by Abdul-Baha in a traveler's narrative. And the traveler's narrative, as you know, was gifted to E.G. Brown, Professor Brown, who attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh in 1890. During that time, a copy in the handwriting of Zayn al-Muqarrabin was given as a gift to E.G. Brown. And E.G. Brown took that and had it published in 2 volumes. The actual first, the original text, facsimiles of it was published in volume 1, and an extensive second volume was the annotations to a traveler's narrative in there. And what he also did in one of the appendices of the second volume of the traveler's narrative, E.G. Brown translated the remaining sections which had not been quoted by Abdul-Baha of the Lawh-i-Sultán in the traveler's narrative. He had it translated and published in one of the appendices of the volume 2 of traveler's narrative. So from that point of view, perhaps the Guardian felt that it was already translated into English and there was no urgency to translate it again, even though the Guardian's translations are far more, in my opinion, elegant and superior and more accurate. But the Guardian had chosen to include only 20% in his commentaries on these great proclamatory events of Baha'u'llah's public declaration. But according to Agha Rizaiq Annad, one of Baha'u'llah's companions, as you know, that has left a chronicle of the early days of Baha'u'llah's, time, particularly his banishment, and he was amongst the companions who accompanied Baha'u'llah from Baghdad all the way to Akka. Him and Hussein Ashchi were the two, besides Nabil, are the two chroniclers, if you will, of the times of Baha'u'llah, which both the Guardian as well as Mr. Balyuzi have relied heavily on their accounts for writing of God Passes By, as well as for Mr. Balyuzi, Baha'u'llah King of Glory. So in his memoirs, Al-Reza says that Baha'u'llah revealed the Lawh-i-Sultán while he was residing in the house of Izzat Agha. Now, the house of Izzat Agha was the last residence in Edirne. As you know, Baha'u'llah sojourn in Edirne was 4 years, 8 months, and 22 days. And when the first major house was the house of Amrullah, the house of God's the house of Reza Beg. Beg is the house that is now a place of pilgrimage in Edirne, and a Baha'i shrine. And he was in that house for 1 year, from about March of 1866 to about the same time the following year in 1867. And then after that, Baha'u'llah, for only a few months, went back to the house of Amrullah. And then after that, because the house of Amrullah was sold, Baha'u'llah had to take up, and his last residence, his last major residence before his exile to Akka, was this house of Izzat Agha. Now, according to a letter that I received, I had the privilege of receiving from the research department from the Universal House of Justice back in 1991, when I had wrote to the World Center about the dating of some of these tablets. In that letter, the research department states that it was likely, the Lawh-i-Sultán was likely composed in late March, early April of 1868. Because there's enough historical evidence that can kind of pinpoint it or narrow it down to those dates. So we know with great certainty, even though there's no colophon and there is no actual date stamp on the original work or original transcribed version of the Lawh-i-Sultán, but according to the research department at the Baha'i World Center, it was composed in late March, early April of 1868. So it would have been in the house of Izzat Agha, as per what Agha Reza Qannad has recounted as well. Now, looking at the content of the tablet and getting right into the text, Baha'u'lláh begins the Lawh-i-Sultán with these words, and I will share with you the Arabic. It begins with the invocation, هو الله تعالى شانه العظمة والاقتدار, and begins, يا ملك الأرض اسمع نداء هذا المملوك إني عبد آمنت بالله وآياته وفديت نفسي في سبيله ويشهد بذلك ما أنا فيها من البلايا التي ما حملها أحد من العباد وكان ربي العليم علي وعلى ما أقول شهيدا. So this has been officially translated, O King of the earth, hearken unto the call of this vassal. Verily, I am a servant who hath believed in God and his signs, and have sacrificed myself in his path. Unto this bear witness the woes which now beset me, woes the like of which no man hath ever before sustained. My Lord, the all-knowing, testifieth to the truth of my words. These were the lines that I just read you, the Arabic. Now it continues, I have summoned the people unto none save God, thy Lord, and the Lord of the worlds, and have endured for love of him such afflictions as the eye of creation hath never beheld. To this testify those whom the veils of human fancy have not deterred from turning unto the most sublime vision, and beyond them he with whom is the knowledge of all things in the preserved tablet. Now the paragraph, I like to identify each of the tablet's paragraph. The 186 is the paragraph of the of Surah Hekal. Would be the one specific to this tablet. Now in the third paragraph, Baha'u'lláh reminds the king of the circumstances of his imprisonment in Tehran and his subsequent exile to the Ottoman Iraq. That part of what Baha'u'llah's purpose in writing this letter, besides the major objective of proclaiming his divine mission to the sovereign of his native land, was also to really set the record straight. There were so many allegations and false rumors that had spread and gossip essentially about Baha'u'lláh, about his faith, about his companions, that in this tablet, Baha'u'lláh sees an opportunity to set the record straight and to clarify a lot of this misinformation or this false news, if you will, to use today's vernacular. So in the third paragraph, Baha'u'lláh reminds the king of the circumstances of his imprisonment in Tehran, which this was very, very much associated with the Shah, and his subsequent exile to the Ottoman Iraq. Baha'u'lláh writes, call thou to mind God's mercy unto thee, how when thou wert imprisoned with a number of other souls, he delivered thee and aided thee with the hosts of the seen and the unseen, until the king sent thee to Iraq after we had disclosed unto him that thou were not of the sowers of sedition. those who follow their corrupt desires and lay aside the fear of God are indeed in grievous error. Now, there are some subtle references here, which is worth noting. You have to understand that after the attempt on the life of the Shah, besides the fact, and I have mentioned this in my other webinars in the course on Baha'u'llah's 3 declarations, I go into much detail, that the blame for this attempt assassination was squarely placed on the Bábí community. And since Baha'u'llah was one of its leaders, Baha'u'llah automatically became accused and became one of the the accusers. Well, one of the individuals accused, and in the eyes of the royal family as the guilty party. Particularly, as I have mentioned, the mother of the Shah, mother of Násiri'd-Dín Shah, was especially wanting to blame this squarely on Baha'u'llah, and really wanted Baha'u'llah's death. And there's a good reason that Násiri'd-Dín Shah wanted the same as well. But the reason why Baha'u'llah was not crucified like other members of the Bábí community, like Tahireh and Sayyid Hussein Yazdi and many prominent Bábís at the time during this period, this reign of terror that ensued soon after the attempt on the life of the Shah, was because of the intercession by the Russian ambassador, Prince Dolgorukov. And Baha'u'llah, in the tablet to the Tsar of Russia, very clearly points to that his deliverance was primarily because of the intercession of the prince. And the prince had gone to the court and very clearly had said to the court, if anything happens to Baha'u'llah, the government of Russia will hold the government of Iran responsible. So, and this was very audacious, and this was very, unprecedented, if you will. So now, the Prince Dolgorukov had recognized, because one of his secretaries, Mirza Majid-Ahi, was Baha'u'llah's brother-in-law. But besides that, he was a fair man, and what he did, he had recognized that Baha'u'llah had nothing to do with this. In fact, one of the ringleaders, if you will, Janab Azim, who was one of the Bábí leaders, he confesses that he had, something to do with that plot to assassinate Násiri'd-Dín Shah. So here Baha'u'llah says that God delivered him, that the king did not deliver him from this, because usually the king would set him free, and perhaps credit for the fact that he showed mercy by releasing Baha'u'llah and exiling him as opposed to killing him. But the king was threatened by the Russian government that he should back off of killing Baha'u'llah. And in fact, as you know, the Russian government had offered asylum to Baha'u'llah, where Baha'u'llah graciously declined and chose to go to Baghdad and choose the Ottoman Turkey as the land of his exile. So here there is this subtle reference by Baha'u'llah. And then he says, those who follow their corrupt desires and lay aside the fear of God are indeed in grievous error. So again, this is a little jab at the royal family, the detractors, and the people who were the enemies of Baha'u'llah. They that spread disorder in the land and shed the blood of men. So this reign of terror was ensued and through the government, through the acts of the government, and this bloody, horrific genocide that took place. So this is where Baha'u'lláh says, they that spread disorder in the land shed the blood of men and wrongfully consume the substance of others. We verily are clear of them, and we beseech God not to associate us with them, whether in this world or in the world to come, unless they should repent unto him. He verily is of those who show mercy, the most merciful. So again, when you read the tablet and when you understand some of the historical aspects and the historical background, then the tablet's context becomes a little bit more clear. In areas like this, for instance. In paragraph 5, Baha'u'lláh begs the king to exercise justice and show mercy to all his subjects. He then reminds him of the ephemeral nature of the world. O king, I adjure thee by thy Lord, the all-merciful, to look upon thy servants with the glances of the eye of thy favor, them with justice, that God may treat thee with mercy. Potent is thy Lord to do as he pleaseth. The world with all its abasement and glory shall pass away, and the kingdom will remain unto God, the most exalted, the all-knowing. In paragraph 7, Baha'u'lláh speaks of the essence of his divine reality and some features of his God-given mandate. And this is a very significant and very important section of the tablet, which we'll spend a few minutes on. Baha'u'lláh says, O king, I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the all-glorious were wafted over me and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven, and for this there befell me what hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow. The learning current amongst men I studied not, their schools I entered not. Ask of the city wherein I dwell, that thou mayest be well assured that I am not of them who speak falsely. Many of you have do recognize this passage. It's a very significant passage. Now, a couple of points worth noting about this passage. It is interesting to note the similarity of Baha'u'llah's words in this passage to that of Jesus as recounted in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 49. I myself, many years ago, when I was reading the messages of both Baha'u'lláh and Jesus, I found this to be quite interesting and quite parallel. So here in the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 49, Jesus says, "For I, Jesus, did not speak of my own accord, but the Father who sent me commanded me what to say and how to say it." So this is very much similar to what Baha'u'lláh just stated to the king. Now, it is also worth noting Abdu'l-Baha's commentary in Some Answered Questions on this verse of Baha'u'lláh. I went extensively through this in my course on Baha'u'llah's declaration. This is a very significant passage where has a very significant theological relevance, and because this notion of I was asleep upon my couch. So this is the passage taken from the new translation of Abdu'l-Baha's Some Answered Questions. So Abdu'l-Baha says, we come to the explanation of the words of Baha'u'lláh when he says, "O king, I was but a man like others asleep upon my couch, when lo, the breezes of the all-glorious were wafted over me and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing." Abdu'l-Baha goes on and says, "This is the station of divine revelation. It is not a sensible but an intelligible reality. It is sanctified from and transcendent above past, present, and future. It is a comparison and an analogy, a metaphor and not a literal truth. It is not the condition that is commonly understood by the human mind when it is said that someone was asleep and then awoke, but signifies a passage from one state to another. For example, sleeping is the state of repose and wakefulness is the state of motion. Sleeping is the state of silence and wakefulness is the state of utterance. Sleeping is the state of concealment and wakefulness is that of manifestation. For example, in Persian and Arabic, Abdu'l-Baha goes on to say, it is said that the earth was asleep, spring came and it awoke. Or that the earth was dead, spring came and it found life again. These expressions are comparisons, analogies, similes, and figurative interpretations in the realm of inner meaning. Briefly, and this is where Abdu'l-Baha comes to the conclusion, the manifestation of God have ever been and will ever be luminous realities, and no change or alteration ever takes place in their essence. At most, before their revelation, they are still and silent, like one who is asleep, and after the revelation, they are eloquent and effulgent, like one who is awake. So in essence, what Abdu'l-Baha says, that Baha'u'lláh, or all the manifestations of God, are manifestations of God from the day that they are born. They are in a state of inactivity until their divine mandate, or their marching orders, if you will, is given to them, so they become invested with that. And I refer to this, that their investiture takes place during the time of their, what the Shoghi Effendi says, when they receive the first intimation of their divine message. So when Baha'u'lláh received the first intimation of his divine mission in the Siyah, it basically, he was activated as a manifestation of God. He was now the manifestation of God as of that moment for a prescribed time, and his ministry began during that period. Before that, he was aware that he was a manifestation of God, but his mandate had not been disclosed to him, and his authority had not been activated. So when that takes place, that investiture takes place, the manifestation of God is like he has awoken. So when Baha'u'lláh says, I was asleep upon my couch when lo, the breezes of the all-glorious wafted over me, this is the meaning of that. Now, friends, we've somewhat ran out of time. There's a lot of material here. So I'm going to actually stop here and take questions because I was hoping to go further in and do up to paragraph 20, but that's going to take at least another hour for us to do that. And since this is a web talk as well, we need to keep that within the time frame that was given. So at this point, I would like to invite Dr. Stockman to chime back in, and if there's any questions from the audience and the students, I'll be happy to attempt to answer them as best as I can.
Thank you very much, Shahrokh. That's a fascinating, especially this last part where you're pointing out what the meaning of asleep on my couch is. And it's, I think, very helpful for a lot of people, because a lot of Baha'is think Baha'u'lláh wasn't a manifestation until the Siyah event or some other event in his life. And I'm wondering, you probably are familiar with some of these accounts of earlier points in Baha'u'llah's life before the Siyah, the fact that he was revealing tablets in Badash to people, the account of him seeing the puppet show, for example, the account of him hearing about the execution of the Banu Qurayza in Mecca, and then afterwards for 12 days him having this experience, which people think happened before Siyah. So I was wondering if you wanted to comment about any of those things and the whole issue of Baha'u'lláh before the Siyah.
Well, very, very good point. the event of the puppet show, obviously, very clearly, Baha'u'llah in Lawh-i-Rais states that this took place at the nuptial fete of his brother. It was actually the party, nuptial party of his older brother, half brother, if you will, and that is basically, he describes what he saw the world and how it is. And how ephemeral it is and how transitory it is. As far as the executions of the Jews of Banu Qurayza in Medina, it's about the horrendous slaughter that took place, and he was, as a child, was very moved by that. That event, and also the reference to the 12 days are actually, even though they're mentioned in the same tablet, but they're talking about a different stage of Baha'u'llah's life. But that 12 days Baha'u'llah is talking about is the 12 days in the dungeon of Tehran, because this tablet was actually revealed in Akka, many years later, and Baha'u'llah is reminiscing, going back to his childhood, and then the events of also what took place in the dungeon of Tehran. So I have explained that in and I don't care to go too much in depth into it. But Baha'u'llah obviously composed letters and wrote to people, but and these can be viewed as tablets, if you will, but they were essentially letters of encouragement or letters of guidance. But until the day that he was invested, Bábí dispensation was in place, and what Baha'u'llah was there, he was there as the promoter and as the as one of the exponents to further promote and propagate the teachings of the Báb. So he wasn't really preferring anything from himself based on his own revelation at that time. So again, any of those letters, which they are very rare and few and far between, were essentially prayers, homilies, or documents of encouragement or letters to various Bábís or friends, but they really did not have any kind of, I believe, special ordinances or significance as far as the laws and the direction of where the cause of God had to go, because the Báb was really at that point the captain, and Baha'u'llah would have been probably at that time the first officer,
right.
And he has to follow the captain's direction. Yes.
Well, I guess the question isn't whether the content is revelatory. Well, that revelatory is not the right word here. Whether the content is new, or whether even this routine encouraging content is revelatory. In other words, is it coming from Baha'u'llah or from beyond Baha'u'llah? I guess that's the interesting question. And any of them survived? We know, I don't think any of them survived, right? So we don't really know.
Well, let me say this to you, and this is my belief, and I believe, and I think Abdul Baha has also made it very clear. If they are the manifestation of God from the day that they are born, whatever they write is revelation. Okay, because when they write, it is, now again, the dynamics of again, this is a much deeper question. That, okay, at what point, if Baha'u'llah, for example, gave instructions for someone, grocery instructions to go and buy some bread or some fruits to someone, is that revelation, or is time where he puts his revelation hat on? I think that's something that is somewhat mystical. Baha'u'llah in the Lawh-i-Hikmat says whenever we want to see something, right, as far as describing his omnisciency, it will appear before us. If we want to see any given knowledge. So again, this is the dynamics, the mystical dynamics of a manifestation of God. He has given us some insight into it, but not the full insight, I believe. I don't believe that we know or we can even comprehend fully the nature of the manifestation of God, in its full scope, if you will. But so as I said, I still maintain that anything that Baha'u'lláh wrote prior to his investiture was really there as a point of encouragement and promotion of the cause of the Bab. And as the Guardian says, he was an active disciple in the and that period prior to him receiving his investiture in the Siyah Chal was the Guardian refers to it as the active discipleship in the service and promotion of the cause of the Bab. So, I believe that any of those letters, if we look at it, they certainly will have the nuances will be about the laws of the dispensation of the Bab. And even, I even believe during the period of concealment where Baha'u'lláh, from the 10 years, the Baghdad period, where was the period of concealment, he is still promoting the revelation, the laws of the Bayan. And we'll see that even in as early as Adrianople, after his open private declaration in the tablet of Ahmad, he says that verily he's the king of the messenger and his book is the mother book, did he but know. So the mother book was still the Bayan, so the laws of the Bayans were still valid until the revelation of the Kitab Aqdas, perhaps. So again, the reality, one thing we have to remember, and Shoghi Effendi in his dispensation of Baha'u'lláh has made it very clear, that the reality of the Bab and Baha'u'lláh are the same. And, this transition as far as between the person of Mirza, of Sayyid Ali Muhammad and Mirza Hussein Ali as these human entities, just makes that, more understandable for us as human beings. But the reality of their revelations, Baha'u'lláh has said, are the same. So it's a continuation of that, but in a more exalted way with the revelation of Baha'u'lláh. So there's a lot of elements of mystical and unknown variables in there, but this is at least how I, with my limited knowledge, can understand it.
I very much appreciate your use of the phrase revelation hat. I will remember that. Baha'u'lláh was wearing this revelation hat at a certain time. That's very useful. And perhaps he didn't bother to look at the tablet of Chrysalis for all information at other times earlier too, who knows. Anyway, we have a bunch of comments now, some of which are thanks. For example, let's see, Nick Okamoto says, what a fantastic way to begin these days of Ha. Thank you, Shahrokh, and happy Ayamaha to everyone. Marco says, great talk, may be one of the most interesting I have heard about history in the Baha'i writings. And then there may be some more farther down. There's now so many comments, I have to sort of go through them in order. Payman asks, is the original of the tablet in Baha'i possession? In other words, I suppose the copy that went to the Shah. Do we have a copy of it?
Yes, I believe because this tablet was, Baha'u'lláh kept this tablet for about a year, or more before it was delivered to Badi to take with him, and it was delivered to him in a wonderful box, and with a prefatory tablet, which eventually found its way after they obviously arrested him. They found that tablet on him, and a copy of that tablet was sent to the Russian authorities, which the Russian authorities forwarded to the Oriental archives, and Baron Victor Rosen actually had it, and he sent it to Edward Brown, and Edward Brown actually translated that and published it in a Traveler's Narratives, second volume in the appendix. So that's the one that we have. Yeah, we don't have the actual text of it. I believe it's still in the archives of the Russian Oriental series, but as far as the tablet itself, it would have been transcribed. Many of these tablets, before they were sent to their recipients, even the tablets of some of the friends, if they were significant tablets, Baha'u'lláh would order them to be transcribed, and his sons were usually, and other secretaries were usually, that was all their daily task, is to transcribe tablets. So I believe an original transcription, an authorized transcription of that tablet is in the possession of the Baha'i World Center, and we have it, and it is there. So I believe there is, yes.
Okay. Marco, who previously had thanked you for the great talk, also asks this interesting question. He says, it'll be interesting to know the opinions of non-Baha'i historians about Násiri'd-Dín Shah and correlate them with the descriptions from Shoghi Effendi. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, more and more is being written about Násiri'd-Dín Shah. One of the things is very fascinating. Queen Victoria kept a detailed diary, and it was pointed out to me, because I'm also interested in, obviously, Queen Victoria, because she's being one of the recipients of Baha'u'llah's proclamatory letters, which hopefully will have a course in future on. But Násiri'd-Dín Shah visited Europe 3 times. And he came to England, and and Queen Victoria sent, I think she may have met with him once, but or twice perhaps, on a formal occasion at Buckingham Palace or one of the palaces. But Queen was not a public figure that would come out, so she would send many of her sons, or the Crown Prince, or Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward. So there is, but I read someplace, and this is something that she detested him, and she did not like the way he treated his subjects. And in fact, there is I think she mentions that he killed one of his servants and had him buried in the grounds of where the palace was, and she was very disturbed by that, and it was kind of covered up because he was the king, and because there were many servants and footmen and everything that Násiri'd-Dín Shah would take with him, besides his chamberlain and his ministers and all that. So I didn't know about this, but it would be good to investigate and find out the truth of this. So when he came to the West, things that he did, that some of it was recorded, but some of it, even the chronicler who was taking account of that, obviously was not going to write that down, for posterity. But in general, Násiri'd-Dín Shah was not a very liked king. The only other king that actually took him on and gave him some advice was Napoleon III, and Napoleon III actually sent him as a gift a chariot, if you will, or the formal, horse-drawn carriage that was that he sent. I think I read that in Abbas Amanat's book, but there was, he was very unorthodox, and many of the kings and rulers really didn't consider him as a civilized king or someone of their equal, if you will. Sure. And obviously bothered Násiri'd-Dín Shah a lot, but he was an autocrat. He did things that, for a longest time, he didn't even have prime minister. There's actually a period, a lot of people don't know, that for close to 20 years and during his reign, he chose not to have a prime minister, and he ruled everything. So he was a true absolutistic, autocratic monarch, and that really brought Iran to its lowest point, morally and economically and so on. So, but yeah, I mean, the more and more that you know about the character, the personality of him, you'll see that he was not a fun-loving individual. Let's put it that way. And yes.
Okay, that's good. That's a good way of putting it, I guess. Then Bayan asks, in Badash, Baha'u'lláh gave himself the title of Baha and revealed these tablets. Would that be considered Baha'u'llah's revelation or the Báb's revelation? Or maybe we're referring specifically to the title Baha here. He also says, thank you very much, for he'd learned very much.
Yeah. Well, it's the appellation, the title Baha is actually referred to in the Qayyum al-Asma. The Báb refers, I am the maid of heaven who's begotten by the spirit of Baha, So this is a very special. I share that with some of the friends in one of my web talks and webinars. So the notion of Baha, now Baha, it was just a matter of time. He took on the title of Baha and became known as Janab Baha, from then on. But this was always preordained, and so you have to understand also the titles of Tahireh and Quddus and Baha that was given by Baha'u'lláh. Báb later on confirmed them. So even though the Baha'u'lláh wrote those, but the Báb confirmed and sanctioned them. So later. So again, this is that mystical dynamics between the Báb and Baha'u'lláh at that time. We don't know what those tablets were. I mean, I don't. From some of the evidences of some of the early, after the Baha'u'llah's investiture, particularly the early Baghdad, very early Baghdad, like the Lawh-i-Sultán, the tablet of all foods, which was revealed a year before he went into his retirement to the mountains of Sulaymaniyah. If you read the tablet of Sultán and you read it in the original, you will see the style of the Arabic is very similar to that of the Báb and the Báb's writings. So you could see there was this kind of transition between that. And so I would not be surprised that the writings of Baha'u'lláh during the ministry of the Báb, if there are anything that has come to light, or if there's anything that has survived, because you got to remember there was a systematic campaign by the government and the Shia clergy to completely destroy all the Bábí writings and the writings of the Báb. And Baha'u'lláh makes reference to that in the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf as well. So that's why the writings of the Báb, many of them are quite rare, and we don't have multiple manuscripts of them. So I wouldn't be surprised, again, if one ever comes to light, and perhaps there are some at the Baha'i World Center that we don't know of, that they will have the style and the manner of the stylistic of the writings of the Báb. So they'd be very similar to that. Yeah,
that's very interesting, because it is distinctive. The styles of the Báb and Baha'u'lláh otherwise are really very distinctive. It seems
they are very, and you see that after Baha'u'llah's return from the mountains of Sulaymaniyah in 1856. So any of the tablets from 1856 onwards, which was around 1857, 58, which around the time of the revelation of the hidden words, you will see that they are now this new revelation. The tablets, it's just they're very different in style, and you'll see that continuously change and progress and develop in its own way. In subsequent years, yes.
Sure. We have a couple of other questions here. Victoria asks, would it be accurate to say that the Shah himself never heard, read aloud, or read the contents of Baha'u'llah's tablet, the Lawh-i-Sultán? He couldn't read it when he received it. What about later? Is there any evidence that he was aware of the contents of the tablet?
Well, I believe he would have read it. Because you know what, he would have read. He would have read, if not all of it from beginning to the end. He would have read parts of it. I think he would have read it because he would have read it, and then he would have said, okay, well, let's give it to because this has a religious, significance to it. Let me pass this on to my trusted, religious advisors, and there were a couple of clergies, in Tehran that he referred the tablet to, but they let him down because they really didn't know how to answer it, but I believe I would be very, very surprised if he never actually set eyes on it. I think that he would have. I mean, literally, Badi took it to him and basically, handed it to him, because was taken from Badi and Badi was not going to just give it to his, one of his minions, if you will, So I think he received it, and I mean, obviously he read it,
Násiri'd-Dín Shah would know Arabic.
Absolutely, yes, because they would have known Quran, and they would have known, oh yeah, I mean, he was educated. He was educated in the contemporary, forms of education, which would have been the Quran. I mean, he's got a title of Násiri'd-Dín, which means the defender of the faith of God. So he would have known beyond just the basic Arabic. He would have known Shia, some basic Shia jurisprudence, some Shia Sharia law. He would have known. I mean, these were the things that they would have taught him that, and some Persian poetries and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, yes. For sure, he would have
more questions here, and I want to be sure to get to them before we run out of time here. Hassan says, does the delay in the release of the tablet have any historical significance other than the fact that no one was worthy enough to transport the tablet?
I don't believe there was any historical significance necessarily, besides the fact that Baha'u'lláh wanted to show. I mean, this tablet was very special. And God wanted to show the devotion and valiancy of some of the followers, and right. To have a youth, arise and be transformed. A youth that was very disinterested in the faith originally, and then to be completely transformed, and then become this great lover, and to be very sacrificial, and. Baha'u'lláh said that, it required a special courier, and it happened to be a youth. So I believe Baha'u'lláh kept it because the circumstances, Badi was not ready at that time, or, how it was. I mean, I think these are all in some ways, in a mystical way, are predestined, So before even Badi knew that he was going to become the Pride of Martyrs, God knew that was his destiny. So it was already preordained. So I think it was something that just had to happen and run its course.
Sure. James has this interesting comment. It seems that there are several different voices in the tablet. Can you comment about that?
Voices in what way?
I think tones of different tones or. Yes. Almost like dialogical kind of positions in the tablet. I don't know what he's referring to more specifically.
Yes, I think, you'll see that the voices are the voice of Baha'u'lláh as the manifestation of God, as the servant, as this, as he says, ghulam in ghulam, this youth, he says mamluk. He refers to himself as this slave, which literally means a slave. So they are the servant, so the servant of God speaking, and then the vicegerent of God speaking and God speaking, you know. So so you will have those voices, and that's common in the proclamatory letters, you know, the styles. I mean, we see that in Surat al-Muluk, you see that in all the other letters, but here I find that the humility that in which Baha'u'lláh is offering these, you know, is making offers, is very, very gracious, you know, that what he's sharing, how he shares, you know, it's with an absolute self-abnegation and with a great deal of humility of the highest order. So to show that he's not after, you know, the crown, he's not after any material possessions, that he is completely, you know, submissive to God's will, and he is doing this because of God's will.
Here's another interesting question. Jerry asks, it would be interesting to discover why Queen Victoria appointed the Shah as a Knight of the Garter in 1873. The circumstances must be formidable, and do you know anything about them?
Well, you know, the Knight of the Garter was something that the kings and queens of it's like a medal. It's like a special privilege that is generally given to monarchs and you know, that would be visiting. So here, obviously, the Queen, you know, made him that because he was a monarch of another nation that had come to visit. So it was part of showing hospitality and grace from one monarch to another. I believe, I don't think he was any special for it that was given the Knighthood of the Garter. Yeah, I mean, it was there. Yes, it was a formal gesture. Yes.
And Paul asks whether the entire PowerPoint will be available on the website, and yes, of course it will be, as will be the recording, which someone else asked about earlier. Those are the ends of our questions that I can see right offhand, and they were good questions, and we had a good discussion, I think, about the tablet, and we look forward to the next talk in 2 weeks when we'll cover, I don't know, you're going to go from there up to around paragraph 40 or so?
Well, I'll make it, you know, as I go through it, because some of these paragraphs require us to pause and delve more into them, like paragraph 7. But we'll see. We're trying to cover. It is a lengthy tablet, right. And we'll do our best to cover as much of it, you know, and then through obviously the forum and through various, you know, with the assistance of Dr. Christopher Buck as well. I'm so delighted to have Dr. Buck, you know, as a colleague here. He's such a great resource, and he's done many of these courses on the summons of the Lord of Hosts. So he'll definitely be a great asset to this course, and I'm looking forward to his comments and to his assistance.
I will be sure to put these videos up in some of our other courses as they're relevant as well. Thank you again very much, Shahrokh. This was really very exciting, and we're looking forward to the upcoming 2 talks, maybe even 3 if you need more time. We'll see, in order to cover the rest of this tablet of Baha'u'llah's, the most lengthy tablet that he addressed to our reigning monarch.